My name is Amanda and I'm 30 years old. 20 years ago, my dad walked out on us without saying a word. And last week, he showed up at my door in the middle of the night, whispering my childhood nickname like no time had passed. I thought I was prepared for anything, until I saw the look in his eyes. Tell me where you're watching from in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe for more family drama stories about strength, healing, and emotional courage. I've replayed that night in my mind so many times that I can recall every tiny detail, even the ones I didn't realize mattered in the moment. It was a quiet Thursday, the kind of night where the neighborhood felt half asleep. The streetlights outside my window glowed a soft orange, and my little house, tucked between two larger ones, felt almost too still. I had been dozing off on the couch, a blanket pulled over my legs and a half-finished cup of tea beside me. It was late, close to 2 in the morning, and nothing about that hour hinted that my whole world was about to tilt. The first thing I noticed wasn't the knock. It was the sinking feeling in my stomach, this strange, uneasy thump, as if something heavy had settled inside me. For a second I thought it was just the dream I had fallen out of, but then I heard it. 3 slow knocks. Not loud, not frantic. Just steady. Measured. Almost familiar. I sat up. Nobody knocks at that hour unless it's an emergency, and I don't have the kind of life filled with middle-of-the-night surprises. I grabbed my phone first out of habit. No missed calls. No texts. No emergency alerts. Just silence. When the knocks came again, a little more firm this time, my heart lifted to my throat. I walked toward the door, every step feeling heavier. I didn't turn on the porch light right away. Something inside me hesitated. It's strange how your body recognizes things before your brain does. I felt it in my chest, a tug like an old wound waking up. Then I switched on the porch light, and my breath disappeared. There he was. My father. The man who left when I was 10 years old. The man who didn't send letters, didn't call, didn't send a birthday card, not even once. The man who had been gone so long that I stopped expecting answers. I stopped expecting anything at all. He was standing on my porch like a ghost pulled out of the past and dropped into the present. Not the tall, confident man I remembered. Not the man with strong shoulders and a quick grin. This version of him looked worn down, thin, slouched, eyes sunken with something heavy behind them. His hair, once dark, had faded into streaks of gray I wasn't prepared to see. "Amanda," he whispered. "Mandy." The sound of that nickname cracked something open inside me. Nobody had called me Mandy in 20 years. I wasn't even sure I liked the name anymore, but hearing it from him, it felt like someone touched a bruise I had learned to live with. My hand froze on the doorknob. I should have slammed the door. I should have told him to leave. That's what I had always imagined I'd do if he ever showed up again. But real life doesn't always follow the scripts we prepare in our minds. "What are you doing here?" I finally asked. My voice sounded sharp even to me. Not angry. Not sad. Just guarded. He swallowed, his throat bobbing. I didn't know where else to go. Those words didn't answer anything, but they landed with the weight of a confession. I stared at him, searching for something, remorse, honesty, anything that made sense. Instead, he looked like a man trying to hold himself together. I didn't invite him in. Not yet. "Why now?" I asked. "After 20 years? He didn't give a straight answer. He just lowered his gaze to the floorboards of the porch and said, "Things happened. I don't have anyone else." That was the moment I noticed the small cut on his cheek. Faint but fresh. A scrape along the side of his jaw. His jacket looked old and worn, like it had been through more than one rough night. One sleeve was torn, and the shadows under his eyes were deep enough to suggest he hadn't slept properly in a long time. My first instinct was to step back, not out of fear but out of emotional overload. When you spend most of your life imagining a reunion, and imagining yourself feeling strong, prepared, unaffected, reality can knock the ground from beneath you. A part of me wanted to ask 1,000 questions. Another part didn't want to hear a single one of his excuses. "Please," he said softly. "Just a minute. I won't stay long." The cold night air spilled into my doorway, and something in me cracked. Not forgiveness, not sympathy, but curiosity. A need for answers I didn't know I still wanted. I opened the door wider. Not an invitation. Just space. He stepped inside slowly, like someone entering a church. His eyes scanned my living room, taking in the simple furniture, the framed pictures, the blanket on the couch. I could see him trying to figure out the kind of life I had built without him. You grew up," he muttered almost to himself. "What did you expect?" I replied, "My life stopped after you left?" A faint sting of guilt flickered across his face, but he didn't argue. He just nodded as if he deserved the comment. I motioned toward the couch. "Sit." He hesitated before lowering himself onto the edge, sitting stiffly like he didn't want to ruin anything. I stayed standing for a minute, arms crossed, creating distance without having to say it out loud. The room settled into a tense silence. I could hear the ticking of the clock hanging on the wall. My breathing felt loud. His hands were trembling slightly, resting on his knees. Not from cold, from nerves. "What happened to you?" I finally asked. He ran a hand over his face. "It's a long story, Mandy. I'm 30 years old. I think I can handle it." He looked at me with eyes that didn't match the man I remembered. They were tired, defeated, but also holding something back. I sat across from him, keeping space between us. "Start with why you left." His shoulders dropped. "I made mistakes. Bad ones." "That's not an answer." He took a long breath. "I thought I could fix things. I thought leaving would make things easier for everyone." "For who?" "Because it sure wasn't easier for me. Or Mom." He winced like the mention of my mother struck a place he didn't want touched. "I wasn't a good husband," he said quietly. "Or a good father. And then things got worse. Much worse." "Worse how?" Instead of answering, he looked away. His jaw tightened. His hands clenched. For a moment I saw a flash of something, fear, maybe anger, maybe shame. I wasn't sure. But one thing was clear. He wasn't telling me the full truth. Not yet. I leaned back, studying him. "If you came here to ask for help, you should know something. I'm not the scared little girl who cried herself to sleep the night you left. You don't get to walk in and pretend like this is some small misunderstanding." "I know," he whispered. "I know, Mandy. That's why I'm here." His voice cracked. Just barely. Something in my chest shifted. Not forgiveness. Not understanding. Something closer to caution mixed with old buried pain. The clock ticked again. The house felt smaller with him inside it, like his presence filled every corner of the room with memories I'd tried to bury. Yet there he was, older, broken, and holding on to secrets that were already making my stomach twist. And I knew, without him saying a word, that this night was only the beginning of something much bigger than I expected. Something that had the power to change everything. Even after he left that night, long before he stood on my porch again, my childhood never truly let me go. His sudden return dragged it all back into the present, like a storm sweeping across a street that had seemed calm for decades. I found myself remembering things I had thought I'd tucked away neatly in boxes. Memories of nights where silence spoke louder than words and small disasters piled up like snowdrifts. I remembered the nights my mother came home, tired beyond belief, her hair damp from running between the laundromat and the diner. She would throw her apron onto the counter, collapse into the worn couch, and let out a sigh that felt like the weight of the entire world pressing down on her shoulders. The smell of fried chicken grease and laundry detergent mingled in the air. Bills stacked on the kitchen table, yellowed and curling at the edges, stared at us like accusatory eyes. I would sit at the counter watching her, pretending to do homework while stealing glimpses of her exhaustion etched across her face. She never wanted me to see her break, but even at 10 I could feel it. Dad wasn't just absent in those nights. He was absent in every small gesture that would have meant the world. The scraped knee I tried to hide from her, the lost homework I was too afraid to tell her about, the neighborhood kids' birthday parties I skipped because I couldn't find the money. He wasn't there. His absence became the silent teacher of my life. It taught me to hide, to act strong even when I was shaking inside, to carry responsibilities that weren't mine. I became the child who tried not to need anyone, because I had learned early that relying on someone could leave you broken and alone. I still remember the night he left as if it had just happened. Mom had been working a late shift at the diner, and I was alone in our cramped living room, trying to read a book while the wind rattled the windows. I thought I heard the front door close softly, a whisper of movement upstairs. I didn't know then it would be the last time he stepped into that house willingly. When I ran to peek outside the front window, the driveway was empty, and the mailbox flap stirred in the cold wind. No note. No goodbye. Just gone. That absence echoed in every choice I made afterward. I was afraid of asking for help, because the one person I had been allowed to depend on vanished without warning. I became skilled at swallowing my fears and pretending I was fine, even when I wasn't. Each misstep, every failure I carried with me as though it were my fault, though I knew logically it wasn't. Somewhere deep down I had internalized the truth of his abandonment. Life could turn upside down in an instant, and the people you expected to protect you might not be there when you needed them most. Mom's resilience shaped me almost as much as his absence did. She never openly complained about him, never spoke of the nights she cried quietly on the kitchen floor or the nights she worried she wouldn't be able to pay the rent. But I could see the traces of her pain in small ways, her shoulders tense when the phone rang, the way she avoided checking her old phone bill boxes, the sudden jump whenever a car door slammed outside. She rebuilt a life for us with the quiet determination of someone who had no choice but to survive. She cooked dinner every night, even when her hands shook with fatigue. She tucked me into bed, kissed my forehead and whispered, "It'll be okay, Mandy. We'll be okay." And somehow in her voice I believed it. But she never let herself lean on me. She made sure that I didn't become a substitute parent for her own needs. She carried her wounds alone, while letting me carry my own small ones. I saw her strength and adopted it as my armor, yet even as I grew into adulthood, the shadows of our past clung to me, stubborn and unyielding. I carried them quietly, hiding the deeper scars behind polite smiles and calm routines, never speaking of them to anyone else. Now, in my adult life, everything seemed orderly on the surface. I had a small apartment, a steady job at a local insurance office, and a routine that didn't invite surprises. My neighbors waved hello, the mail arrived predictably, and my evenings were spent in quiet comfort, curled up with a book or a cup of tea. It was ordinary, simple, predictable, and I liked it that way. Stability became my refuge, a way to protect myself from the chaos of my childhood memories. But his sudden return shattered that fragile balance. The moment I saw him on my porch, the neat routines of my life collapsed. The stability I had worked so hard to create, careful boundaries, organized schedules, emotional walls, crumbled under the weight of his presence. Even mundane tasks felt different afterward. I found myself pausing before answering the phone, imagining it might be him calling. The shadows of my childhood crept back into my apartment, curling in corners, twisting through my chest, and making my breath catch for no reason. I couldn't stop the flood of memories. I remembered walking home from school, the backpack heavier than it should have been, filled with books I wasn't sure I could afford. I remembered our tiny living room, the couch sagging in the middle, the smell of old carpet mingling with the faint odor of leftover coffee. I remembered the nights I tried to sleep while listening to the hum of the street, wondering where he was and whether he even thought about us. Those memories were like fingerprints pressed into my mind, impossible to erase. And the more I thought about him standing on my porch now, the more a bitter suspicion began to rise. He didn't come back out of love, out of regret, or even out of some sudden desire to reconnect. No, I could sense it. He wanted something. Something from me. Maybe money. Maybe comfort. Maybe a sense of closure he had never earned. But I knew instinctively that whatever his reason, it was selfish. He wasn't here to repair the damage he caused. He was here for himself. That suspicion made my chest tighten. I remembered all the little ways he had abandoned us, missing doctor's appointments I had to sit through alone, failing to show up for school events he promised to attend, leaving my mother to scramble for every missed paycheck. His absence had left tangible gaps in my life, and now the thought that he had returned with his own agenda felt like salt in a wound that had barely healed. I thought about confronting him immediately, demanding the truth, but a small part of me hesitated. The child in me, the one who had curled up on the floor of the kitchen when he walked out, still held on to a faint hope that maybe he could explain, that maybe he would look at me, really see me, and apologize in a way that meant something. But even as I hoped, the adult in me, the woman who had learned to survive on her own, warned against it. The night stretched on. I moved through my apartment mechanically, making a cup of tea I couldn't drink, checking the locks on the windows twice, adjusting the throw blankets on the couch as though rearranging them could somehow restore my sense of safety. Each action reminded me that I had created a world where I was in control, yet that control was fragile. easily threatened by a man who had once torn everything away. Sleep was impossible. I kept replaying the night he walked out, the sound of the door shutting, the way Mom had cried silently in the dark, trying to shield me from her heartbreak. I remembered feeling responsible, like if I had been better, quieter, stronger, or somehow more lovable, he might have stayed. I knew it wasn't true, yet the shadow of guilt clung to me like a second skin. I sat at the edge of my bed and traced my fingers over the old photo of the three of us on the living room wall, the smiling faces frozen in time. I had studied that photo countless times as a child, imagining what could have been. Now, with him on my porch, the photo felt like a cruel reminder that nothing could return to that way. Even the little sounds in my apartment, the hum of the refrigerator, the creak of the floorboards, the distant siren from the street, seemed louder than usual, amplifying the unease in my chest. I thought about calling Mom, but I didn't. She had spent decades shielding me, rebuilding our lives, and I wanted to face this moment on my own. By the time the first light of dawn brushed through the blinds, my mind had cataloged every memory, every feeling, every betrayal. I realized that his return was forcing me to confront not only the wounds he left, but also the ways I had survived without him. The resilience I had built, the routines that protected me, and the quiet strength I had cultivated were all being tested. And yet, beneath the anger, suspicion, and pain, a strange clarity began to form. I understood that I didn't have to let him in. Not physically, not emotionally, not in any way that would compromise the life I had fought to maintain. The past had shaped me, yes, but it didn't have to control me. His return didn't have to undo everything I had created for myself. For the first time that night, I felt a faint flicker of resolve. I wasn't 10 anymore. I wasn't the scared child who watched her father vanish and thought the world had ended. I was Amanda, 30 years old, and while the past would always be a part of me, I could decide how it influenced my present. I realized I could face him, carefully, cautiously, without letting the shadows of my childhood dictate my actions. I could demand the truth, set boundaries, and protect myself in ways I never could before. The past had shaped me, but it no longer had the power to define me entirely. And so, as the dawn crept further into the apartment, I sat in quiet reflection. The memories, the pain, the fear, they were still there. But so was my strength, my clarity, and the determination to meet him on my own terms. The past hadn't truly let me go, but I was beginning to understand that I could meet it head-on and still hold on to the life I had built without him. The morning after he appeared on my porch, I couldn't sleep. Even as the sunlight seeped through my blinds and painted stripes across my bedroom floor, my thoughts kept circling back to him. He wasn't gone. Not yet. And the fact that he had returned meant something that I was beginning to realize was not about us but about him. I decided I needed answers. I needed to know why he had come back after 20 years. Not because I wanted to forgive him or invite him back into my life, but because I needed the truth. The truth had been missing for so long, replaced by assumptions, silence, and the hollow ache of absence. And now I had the chance, whether I wanted it or not, to confront it. I suggested meeting him at the little diner on Main Street, the one I often went to when I wanted to be alone but surrounded by the low murmur of life. The smell of coffee and pancakes hit me as soon as I opened the door, the familiar warmth of the place providing a fragile sense of comfort. He was already sitting there, hunched over a cup of black coffee, fidgeting with the spoon in his hand. He looked smaller than I remembered. Not physically, but in the way a person carries themselves when burdened by years of regret, or perhaps fear. His eyes darted around, avoiding mine at first, and then hesitantly meeting them as I slid into the booth across from him. I took a deep breath. "Why are you really here?" I asked. Not the polite question. Not the casual one. The question that had been pressing in my chest since the moment I saw him. Don't tell me it's about reconnecting. Don't give me that. I want the truth. He swallowed and looked down at his coffee. The spoon clinked against the mug. He began, then stopped. The pause stretched out, heavy with years of silence. I thought maybe it was time, he said finally. I wanted a chance to explain myself. I didn't respond. I studied him, taking in the lines around his eyes, the gray in his hair, the way his hands trembled slightly as he wrapped them around the mug. He looked like a man who had carried something far too long. And I realized something sharp. He had practiced this moment. He had rehearsed what he was going to say to me. So start, I said finally, keeping my voice steady. Tell me why you left. All of it. Every piece you've been hiding for 2 decades. He hesitated, then nodded, as if he had been waiting for permission to open a door that had been locked for 20 years. When I left, he said slowly, I thought I was protecting you all. I thought, if I walked away, maybe life would be easier for your mom and for you. Protecting us? I echoed. By disappearing without a word? By leaving us with nothing but bills, empty beds, and questions we couldn't answer? His face tightened. I didn't know how to handle it. Things got complicated. And I was scared. I could feel my jaw clenching. The words were familiar excuses, but there was a flicker of something deeper behind them. Something that I couldn't name yet. Complicated how? I asked, leaning forward. Tell me. I can handle it. He took a deep breath and looked around the diner, as if the walls themselves might judge him for what he was about to reveal. I made mistakes. Big ones. When I left, I thought I could start over somewhere else, fix the life I had ruined. But it didn't work. Not the way I imagined. I kept my expression neutral, though inside, a mixture of anger, curiosity, and fear churned. Start over where? Explain. His eyes finally met mine, and there was a vulnerability there that I hadn't expected. I found someone else. I built another life. Another family. The words hit me like a slap. Not that he had left, but that his reasons weren't even about survival, fear, or being lost. They were about someone else. I felt my stomach tighten, a cold knot forming. I had imagined explanations, half believed that maybe he had left to protect us, or that circumstances had forced him away. But this was something different. I have a son, he added quietly, almost like he feared my reaction more than he feared the truth itself. He's 10 now, your age when I left. I didn't answer immediately. My mind was spinning, trying to reconcile the man I saw in front of me with the one I had built memories around. The one who promised he would always be there and wasn't. I felt like I was staring at 2 lives that had intersected for a moment and had left chaos in their wake. And now? I asked finally, my voice measured. Why come back to me? Why now? His hands tightened around his coffee cup. He looked at me with eyes that were pleading, ashamed, desperate. I don't have anywhere else to go. That life, it's not what I thought. The family I tried to create, they don't want me. I realized that I lost everything that mattered to me, and I wanted to see if maybe I could make things right with you. Or at least be forgiven. I felt a rush of conflicting emotions. Anger, disbelief, a touch of pity. Part of me wanted to tell him to leave, to walk out of the diner and slam the door on the past once and for all. Another part of me wanted to hear more. To understand fully what had led him to this moment. This pathetic, shame-filled attempt at reconnection. You think an apology and a coffee at a diner fixes 20 years? I asked quietly, my hands gripping the edge of the table. You think it makes up for everything you abandoned? He looked down, ashamed. I know it doesn't. I know it's not enough. But I had to try. I watched him, noticing the way his shoulders slumped, the subtle trembling in his hands, the faint lines etched deep into his forehead. He looked tired, worn down, fragile. And yet I realized that fragility had not erased the man who hurt us, the choices he made, the absence that shaped my entire childhood. We sat in silence for a long moment. The diner's hum of conversation and clinking dishes felt distant, almost unreal. My mind raced with images of the past. The nights of unanswered questions, my mother struggling to pay bills, the scraped knees I bandaged alone, the birthdays and school plays he never attended. And now this man, broken and pleading, sat across from me as if he had the right to ask for a place in my life. Do you even realize what your leaving did? I asked finally, my voice trembling slightly despite my effort to stay calm. Do you realize what we went through? Mommy, your absence didn't just hurt us. It shaped us in ways we're still trying to understand. He nodded slowly. I know. I've thought about it every day. Every single day. I wasn't strong enough back then. I thought leaving would help. I see now it only made things worse. I wanted to believe him, wanted to feel some relief that maybe he recognized the damage. But my gut told me the truth was more complicated. He had returned, yes, but not purely out of remorse. There was need there. Dependency. Perhaps selfishness. And beneath it all, a lesson I had learned painfully over the years. People like him rarely change for others, they change only when they are forced to confront the consequences of their own choices. I need to know the whole story, I said finally. Not excuses. Not half-truths. Every detail. And you can't leave anything out this time. He nodded, swallowing hard. I'll tell you everything, he said quietly. And as he began, the story unfolded in pieces I hadn't expected. Nights he had tried to start a new life, arguments with his second partner, the rejection he faced from the family he had built, the financial struggles that spiraled out of control. Each revelation peeled back another layer of the man in front of me, not the father I had lost, but the human being who had failed at being anything close to reliable. And as he spoke, I realized something I hadn't allowed myself to admit. Hearing the truth didn't erase the pain, but it made the stakes real. It wasn't just about childhood memories anymore. It was about facing a man who had hurt us, a man who thought he could walk back into our lives, and deciding what I was willing to allow. By the time we left the diner, the sunlight was high and harsh, reflecting off the windows and making everything seem sharper, more real. I walked away feeling a strange mixture of exhaustion, anger, and clarity. I had learned the truth, all of it, and while it didn't make forgiving him any easier, it gave me a foundation to stand on. For the first time in decades, I felt a strange kind of power. I could see him clearly, flaws, regrets, and all. And I knew that the choices I made next, whether to let him in or leave him out, would be entirely my own. The moment I decided we needed to talk, I knew it wouldn't be easy. The truth I had uncovered at the diner wasn't enough to close the distance between us. It had only made the weight of his absence more tangible. I felt the tension coil tight in my chest as I walked toward his rented apartment, the place he had claimed as temporary while he figured out what he wanted from me. Every step felt heavy, every streetlight flicker casting shadows that reminded me of all the nights I spent waiting for him to come home, and realizing he never would. When I arrived, he was standing at the door, a reluctant smile on his face that didn't reach his eyes. He opened the door before I could knock, as if expecting me, as if he had rehearsed this moment just as he had rehearsed the diner conversation. I didn't step inside immediately. I stayed on the threshold, feeling the familiar surge of anger and hurt press against my ribs. I think we need to be honest, I said, my voice low but steady. Everything. No half-truths, no excuses, no pleading. I need to hear the truth from start to finish. He nodded, his face pale, his lips pressed into a thin line. I'm ready, he said, though I could hear the tremor in his voice. The apartment smelled faintly of stale coffee and old carpet, a combination that made me uneasy. He gestured for me to sit, and I chose the farthest chair from him. I needed space both physically and emotionally. The first thing I noticed was the way he avoided my gaze. Every word he said seemed carefully measured, like he was balancing between honesty and self-preservation. I know I don't deserve this, he started. But I had no one else. I was desperate. I needed help, and you were the only person I thought might understand. Understand? I echoed, my voice sharper than I intended. Do you even realize what that sounds like? You left us. You abandoned your family. And now, decades later, you think you deserve understanding. He flinched but didn't interrupt. He seemed to be waiting for me to let the anger pour out before he responded. I could see it in the way his fingers fidgeted with the sleeve of his sweater, the way his jaw tightened with every word. He was afraid, and perhaps rightly so. You have no idea what it was like. I continued, the words spilling faster than I could stop them. The nights I cried myself to sleep. The way Mom worked herself into the ground to keep a roof over our heads. The bills that piled up because you didn't think we deserved stability. Do you think any of that is fixable with an apology? He looked down at the floor, silent for a long moment, as if the weight of my words finally landed on him. I know it's not, he said quietly. I know I can't undo what I did. I've carried it every day. I felt a surge of emotion that wasn't just anger. It was something deeper, a raw, aching combination of grief, betrayal, and unresolved longing. Carrying it doesn't help us, I said. It doesn't erase the years you weren't there. It doesn't give my mother the life you promised she'd have, or me the childhood I deserved. He swallowed hard and finally lifted his gaze. I know, he admitted. I'm not asking for forgiveness, Amanda. I wanted you to know why. I wanted you to understand that leaving wasn't just carelessness. I made choices, yes. Terrible ones. But they weren't made lightly. I shook my head, feeling the tension in my shoulders climb. Choices? You call abandoning your family choices? Do you even hear yourself? I hear myself, he said softly. And it haunts me every day. I thought leaving would make it better for everyone. I thought if I walked away it would make life easier for you and your mother. I was wrong. I see that now. I was 10 years old when you left. I interrupted, my voice breaking slightly. 10. I didn't understand bills or jobs or adult decisions. I only understood one thing, that you weren't coming back. And I carried that every day. Every birthday you missed, every parent-teacher conference, every scraped knee and broken promise. It's all because of you. He flinched again, and I noticed a glimmer of real pain cross his face. I know, he whispered. I see it now. And I hate myself for it. Seeing it isn't enough, I said, tears threatening to fall. Do you think you can just explain it away and I'll let it go? Do you think I can just pretend that nothing happened? He didn't respond immediately. Instead, he leaned back in his chair, his hands clasped tightly in front of him. The silence stretched, heavy and suffocating. I felt my anger and hurt twisting inside me, knotting into something almost physical. I don't know what I expected, I said finally. Maybe I thought hearing the truth would make me feel better. But it doesn't. Just makes me realize how alone we were. How alone I was. His shoulders slumped. I can't take that away, he said quietly. I can't undo the past. I can't give you back the years you lost. I can't even promise I'll make it right. I only want to try. Try. I echoed, incredulous. After 20 years, you think trying now is enough? He nodded slowly, eyes wet. I know it's not. I know I'm too late. But if I don't try, I don't know if I can forgive myself at all. I felt a sudden rush of exhaustion, the kind that comes when a dam finally bursts. I had carried my anger, my fear, my pain for decades, and now it was spilling over uncontainable. You have no idea what it feels like to wait for someone who never comes back, I said, voice shaking. You have no idea what it feels like to grow up thinking that love isn't guaranteed, that promises don't mean anything, that you have to protect yourself because no one else will. And now you show up and expect what? Sympathy? Forgiveness? I don't expect anything, he said, his voice cracking. I needed to tell you. I needed you to know that leaving wasn't because you weren't worth it. It was me. I was weak. I was scared. I failed. I stared at him, taking in the man across from me. I saw the fear, the shame, the regret. I saw the same man who had haunted my childhood memories, the same man whose absence had shaped me into who I was. But seeing him like this broken, pleading human, it was both infuriating and heartbreaking. I can't undo the past, I said finally. And I can't just let you back into my life. I won't. He nodded again, silently acknowledging the truth I had laid down. But even as I spoke, I felt the last piece of something inside me break. A fragile thread of hope I hadn't realized I was holding on to. The idea that maybe he could be different, maybe he could be the father I had dreamed of, gone. Shattered. Replaced by reality. We sat in silence after that, the weight of our shared history filling the room in a way that words never could. I felt drained, hollow, and yet strangely liberated. The confrontation had stripped everything away. Expectations, illusions, and the fragile hope I had unconsciously clung to. What remained was raw truth, unfiltered and unflinching. When I finally stood to leave, I realized something important. The confrontation didn't fix anything. It didn't heal the wounds. It didn't suddenly make him the father I had imagined. But it gave me clarity. It showed me that the past, painful and devastating as it was, didn't have to define the rest of my life. As I walked out into the crisp evening air, I felt the remnants of grief and anger swirling inside me. But I also felt a strange sense of empowerment, the knowledge that I could face him, face the truth, and still choose the life I wanted for myself. He had returned, broken and repentant, but I had survived, stronger than ever, and I would continue to survive on my own terms. The confrontation had taken the last piece of my fragile hope and replaced it with something steadier. Self-awareness, resilience, and the ability to stand alone without fear. And for the first time in 20 years, I felt a quiet, unwavering sense of control over my own story. The night after our confrontation, I sat alone in my apartment, the quiet stretching like a thin veil across the room. The apartment smelled faintly of the herbal tea I'd poured earlier, the steam curling into the air, a small comfort against the turmoil in my chest. I couldn't stop replaying the words we had exchanged. His admissions, his apologies, his helpless eyes, they all lingered in my mind, heavy with the weight of 2 decades of absence. I realized something I hadn't allowed myself to admit before. I didn't need his forgiveness. I didn't need him to explain or to beg or to justify his choices. What I needed, what I had always needed, was freedom. Freedom from waiting, from hoping, from carrying the weight of a man who had abandoned me when I was too small to defend myself. And in that realization, I felt a spark of something I hadn't felt in years: control. The next morning I took a walk through the neighborhood I had grown up in, the streets I had once wandered alone as a child, the familiar creak of the sidewalk beneath my sneakers, the smell of fresh bread from the corner bakery, the laughter of children riding bikes past my old elementary school. It all felt both comforting and bittersweet. Every corner reminded me of what had been lost, but also of what I had survived. I stopped outside my old home, now occupied by strangers, and traced the outline of the window where I used to watch him leave. Memories surfaced unbidden. The nights Mom worked double shifts, the arguments we had about money, the nights I cried alone on the living room floor. Each memory was sharp, vivid, but it no longer carried the same weight of helplessness. I could remember without trembling. I could see the past without letting it control me. Returning to my apartment, I began the task of reclaiming my life. I cleaned every corner, not just physically but symbolically. I organized my books, sorted through old mementos, and boxed away items that carried the ghosts of his absence. Each object I touched reminded me of my strength, of the ways I had survived without him. It was a quiet, deliberate act of reclaiming space. Not just my apartment, but my mind, my heart, and my future. That evening I called Mom. Her voice was soft, tinged with curiosity and a little concern. "Are you okay, Mandy?" she asked. "I am now," I said. "I've decided something. I need to let go of the past, not forget it, not erase it but release it. I can't let him or what he did define me anymore." Mom was silent for a moment. Then she said, "I've been waiting for you to say that. You've carried it long enough." Tears welled in my eyes. For the first time, I felt the weight of years lift slightly, as though a door that had been tightly closed for decades had finally swung open. Mom and I didn't need to speak at length. The understanding between us was enough. We had survived. We had rebuilt. And now we could exist without the shadow of his choices hanging over us. A few days later he sent a message. It was simple. "Can we talk?" I stared at it, my fingers hovering over the screen. I didn't reply immediately. I thought about all the evenings I had spent hoping he would come back, all the mornings I woke up to the realization that he hadn't. I realized that responding was optional, that he no longer had power over me unless I allowed it. Finally, I typed a response, carefully measured. "I don't need to talk. I wish you well, but my life is mine now." The sense of finality was electric. I felt the last thread of dependence on him snap. It was liberating and terrifying at the same time, but mostly it was peaceful. I had made a choice, not out of revenge, not out of anger, but out of self-respect and clarity. I wasn't closing the door to him out of hatred. I was closing it to protect the life I had fought to build. In the weeks that followed, I noticed subtle shifts in my daily life. Mornings felt lighter. I walked with a steadier step, carried myself with a quiet confidence I hadn't allowed myself before. Even at work, I noticed how I interacted with colleagues differently. Less guarded, more present, less burdened by old fears and guilt. It was like I had been holding a heavy coat of memories for years, and now, finally, I had hung it up and walked forward unencumbered. One Saturday afternoon, I decided to visit the lake I used to go to with friends as a teenager. The water shimmered under the sun, reflecting the sky in a way that felt almost surreal. I took a deep breath and let myself walk along the shore, bare feet brushing against the warm sand. The wind carried the faint scent of pine and the distant laughter of families enjoying the day. I let it wash over me, imagining it sweeping away the remnants of my childhood pain. I sat on a weathered bench watching the water ripple. I thought about forgiveness, not for him but for myself. I realized that letting go wasn't about excusing his actions. It was about releasing the grip that his choices had held over me for 20 years. It was about reclaiming my narrative, my emotions, and my peace. That evening, I started writing in my journal, something I hadn't done in years. I wrote about the confrontation, the diner conversation, the moments of anger, and the moments of clarity. I wrote about my mother, her sacrifices, her strength, and the quiet love that had carried us through. I wrote about the life I wanted now, simple, steady, and my own. Each word felt like a brick in a foundation I was building for my future. As night fell, I opened the window and let the cool air in. The city lights blinked in the distance, distant and steady, like tiny beacons of resilience. I realized that freedom wasn't a dramatic event, or a confrontation or a declaration. It was a series of small, intentional acts. Choosing boundaries, reclaiming my space, letting go of guilt, refusing to let his presence dominate my life. It was in these choices that I found liberation. The following week, I met a friend for coffee at our usual cafe. We laughed over memories from college, shared small victories from our lives, and simply enjoyed the company of someone who had been a consistent presence. For the first time in decades, I felt untethered from the past. I could exist fully in the present, without the constant echo of his absence haunting every decision, every moment, every breath. One evening, I walked past the park where I used to play as a child. The swings creaked in the wind, empty now, and I paused for a moment. I thought about him, not with longing or anger, but with a kind of detached acknowledgement. He had been part of my story, yes, but he no longer had to be part of my life. I had survived without him, and now I could thrive without him dictating the terms of my peace. The real liberation came gradually, in these small, quiet moments. The morning sunlight spilling across my bed, the laughter of friends, the smell of fresh coffee brewing in my kitchen, the satisfaction of a day lived fully on my own terms. Each day reinforced the truth. I didn't need him. I didn't need his validation, his explanations, or even his presence. I had built a life that was mine entirely, and that realization was intoxicating. Months passed, and with each passing day, the memories of abandonment became less like chains and more like markers of resilience. I still remembered him, still recalled the nights of loneliness and worry, but the pain no longer dominated me. It existed as a reference point, a reminder of what I had endured and the strength I had cultivated because of it. One evening, I took my mother out to dinner, a small gesture of celebration for all we had survived. We laughed over shared memories, reminisced about childhood quirks, and spoke about the future, bright, open, and free from the shadow of his choices. Looking at her, I realized that the ending I had finally reached wasn't about him at all. It was about us, about reclaiming the life we deserved, about choosing peace over pain, and about honoring the resilience that had carried us this far. By the time I returned home that night, I felt a quiet certainty. Freedom wasn't about forgetting the past, nor was it about punishing him for it. It was about standing tall, claiming my life, and refusing to let his actions define me any longer. The ending wasn't dramatic or explosive. It was deliberate, measured, and deeply empowering. It was the first day in decades where I truly felt unshackled, whole, and at peace. And as I sat by the window, watching the city lights twinkle against the night sky, I whispered to myself what I had been too afraid to say for years. I am free. I am mine. And nothing, no one, can take that away from me again.